The year is dying. The light retreats like a hunted beast, and in its wake the old gods begin to stir. Smoke curls through the hollows, and the earth sweats rot and death. Somewhere in the distance a door creaks open between this world and the next. On these nights the veil thins, and if you listen you'll hear it. The soft tread of the dead returning home, the scrape of knives against bone-white flesh, and the whisper of lovesick girls against flickering candlelight. Once, this night was not only for pumpkins, sweets and funny costumes. It was a time when the living supped with spirits, and when we read our fates in apples and ash. When we spoke to the dark, and the dark whispered back. Today we remember those older tales, so let's explore the rituals that shape the Halloween we know today. The Halloween that we know and love today has its roots in a much, much older festival, and that is the celebration of Samhain. And Samhain was first mentioned in early Irish literature from about the 9th century, and it was talked about as a time of feasting and celebration. And this is a time when the animals are brought back from the summer pastures, animals would be slaughtered, it's the end of the harvest, it is the beginning of winter. And it was also seen as a liminal time when the veil was thin and spirits would be able to pass from the other world into this world. There are even certain sites around Ireland where they are said to be connected to the other world, and at this time of year, spirits would come through them. There are even Neolithic passage tombs which are thousands of years old that are aligned with the sunrise on Samhain. So it's a very, very ancient festival, and like all things it has spread throughout the world and all over the British Isles and Ireland. And then what we had was a huge displacement of Irish people who were moved over to America during the famine. And they brought their culture with them, and that has ended up with where we are today, which is modern Halloween, where we still have echoes of some of these old celebrations, but it has been very modernised with pumpkins, trick-or-treating, dressing up, parties and this kind of thing. But what I wanted to do in this video was just explore some of the lesser known Halloween traditions, because there are so many and so many unique ones that I never really see people talk about. So I wanted to share them with you and give you a little bit of info about what people used to do, and I'm sure what some people still do. So the first one is actually something that you might have heard of, or you might have done this yourself, because I have it in good faith that many people in the UK, Ireland and even America did this when they were younger. So please let me know in the comments if this was something that you did. But this is turnip carving. So this is the great ancestor of pumpkin carving, and you can really understand why people moved to pumpkins. They are infinitely easier to carve. If you've carved a turnip, you will know it takes a bit of elbow grease. So this is something that originated in Ireland and is connected to a folk tale about a man named Stingy Jack. So the story goes that there was a man named Stingy Jack, and he was not a very liked man. He was a drunk, he was bad, he was always up to trouble, nobody liked him very much. So one day the devil came to take his soul and take it to hell. But Stingy Jack was very clever, and he was able to trick the devil. And there are a few different versions of the story. Some say he drew around him, some say that he tricked him to go up into a tree to pick some apples for him. There's a few different stories, but needless to say, he tricked the devil and trapped him. And he agreed to let the devil go free as long as he promised that he would never take his soul to hell. So the devil agreed. So years and years later, Jack still has not given up his bad ways, and now it's his time to die. But heaven won't take his soul because he's such a bad man. So he goes to hell instead. But the devil, true to his word, will not take the soul of Stingy Jack. And in some versions of the story, he takes a coal from the embers of hell and gives it to Jack. Jack hollows out a turnip, puts the coal inside, and uses this as his lantern to light the way. But Jack is doomed. He can't enter heaven, he can't enter hell, so his soul wanders for eternity. So there's a phenomenon called will-o'-wisp, which is where you can see light especially on places like bogs. And we know now that there are certain scientific explanations for this, gases and things like that. But a lot of people say that the will-o'-wisp is Jack with his lantern, forever doomed to wander the in-between realms, not quite heaven, not quite hell, but not of this earth any longer. So if you see a light in the distance in nature, it might just be Jack and his turnip lantern, roaming the earth for eternity. There are mentions in newspapers from the 1800s in the US about Irish immigrants carving turnips, and the Irish Folklore Commission also records children carrying turnip lanterns. So this is very much a very traditional thing. As I say, a lot harder to carve than a pumpkin, a lot harder to get a good design into, so it's very easy to see why it was swapped over. But this is the original pumpkin carving was with the turnip, and I think they are very effective. I think they look creepier, they look really cool, and they last a little bit longer as well, so maybe give that a go this year. So the next tradition that you may not have heard of is nut burning, and this actually comes from Northern England and Scotland, and it was a divinatory practice. So it was a way of looking into the future and trying to figure something out, and it was used for love divination. So the idea would be to get hazelnuts, burn them on a fire, and see what happened. And if the hazelnuts burned peacefully and calmly together, it was a good sign for love. But if they were popping, exploding, going crazy, it was a really bad sign for your love life. And sometimes people would assign hazelnuts to their lover or the person they were interested in, and that would be a divinatory practice as well. And this is interesting because hazel is so deeply connected with the idea of divine wisdom and knowledge, and has been for such a long time. So in Irish mythology, there's a really fascinating story about something called the Salmon of Knowledge. And essentially there were some hazelnuts that dropped into a sacred pool, and a salmon ate them and was basically carrying the whole wisdom and knowledge of the universe. And there's a great hero from Irish lore called Finn McCool, and this is a story of his boyhood deeds. And essentially what happened was he was cooking the salmon on the fire for someone else. But when he was doing so, he accidentally burnt his thumb and he got a blister on his thumb. He just instantly put it in his mouth to try and soothe it, popped the blister, disgusting I know, and gained the knowledge of the universe. He gained the knowledge that the salmon had from eating this divine hazel, and he was imbued with the whole knowledge of the universe. And from that point on, if he sucked on his thumb, he was granted divine wisdom. So it's really connected to that idea of deep, deep wisdom and unknowable things. Hazel was also really prized for magic and divination. Dowsing rods are a little bit contentious, a bit controversial, but it's the idea of using rods to try and find something. It could be water, wells underground, great treasures, metals and this kind of thing. And hazel was very much favoured. We've got tons of writings about people using hazel from the Middle Ages onwards. So hazel is really connected to knowledge and the divine, and it's just really interesting that it came all the way through to this fairly simple divinatory practice that people would be doing around the time of Halloween. We're going to stay in Scotland for a little bit because it also has another really interesting divinatory practice which I have never heard anyone talk about, and this is kale pulling. And it's literally what it says on the tin. It is the idea of around this time of year going out and pulling up the kale, and whatever the roots or what it would be like underground would denote something about your love life. And it was said that the shape of the roots would tell you about the figure of your partner. So if you had a long, thin root, you'd be looking out for a tall, slender man. Or if they're a little bit shorter and stubbier, then you know who to look out for. And it was also said that the amount of soil that was clinging to the root had symbolism too. So if there was tons and tons of soil on the root, this would be a really good sign, and it would indicate that you would be wealthy in the coming year and there would be a lot of abundance coming your way. But if there wasn't much soil clinging to a root, no such luck, and you might be in for a little bit of a tight year to come. There are mentions of this in a few other places with some different regional variations. So leeks in Wales and cabbage in Ireland. So it's likely that it's spread around a little bit. But I think this is a really interesting, unique one. And it's all kind of tied back to this idea. It's a liminal time of year. It's a magical time of year. It's a time when you can tap into those unknowable mysteries and find out things about the future. The next one you may have heard of actually, because this has become quite a popular thing among neo-pagans and modern day witches, and this is the idea of a dumb supper. So at this time of the year, we're really thinking about ancestors, those who've gone before and those who've passed on. And the idea of a dumb supper is to basically lay out a dinner and eat it in silence. But there are a few different things to think about with this. So the modern idea and what's ended up being now is that you would lay a place for your ancestor who's passed on as a mark of respect, a way to connect with them. And that would be a really lovely thing to do. Maybe you'd make their favourite meal, something like that. But when we trace this back a little bit older, it also has its roots again in love divination. So accounts vary, but essentially the principle is the same. You would have a silent supper. In some cultures, you would eat the food backwards as well. So start with dessert and do things very carefully. And the idea would be to try and divine who your love was going to be. You leave an empty space for them and look for signs as to who they might be. You might look in a mirror or look for different signs on the table or whatever that is. And you wouldn't want to speak or do anything correctly because this could kind of break the spell and stop your ancestor or the love divination from happening. This spread over to the US through various immigration and now is a popular thing to do in the modern day to connect back with your ancestors at this time of year. So the next one is Guising, which is essentially dressing up for Halloween. And Halloween is still a thing that many people dress up for. The costumes may not be as scary as they once were, but it's still very much alive and people love to do it. And as I said, this is a liminal time. This is a time when supernatural beings and spirits would come forth from the other world. They'd be roaming the streets. And this was a way to confuse the spirits. Wandering spirits would see you in these disguises and be confused about the whole thing. So it was kind of a protective thing. And this got linked in with a few different things which came to the modern idea of trick or treating. And people would essentially knock door to door, but they would, kind of like Christmas caroling, they would sing songs, tell stories, things like that in return for something. So quite connected to the idea of guising is souling, which is an English tradition. So in this tradition, people, primarily poor people, would go door to door and they would be given a soul cake in return for saying prayers for the deceased relatives of the people who were in the house. So there's very much an idea that a soul could get trapped and not make its way to heaven. Maybe there was an improper burial or something involved in sin or just something not quite right, where you'd be very worried that your relative had died and had not passed into heaven. They were stuck in this liminal space between worlds. And so people would go and they would say these prayers in return for receiving a soul cake. And a soul cake is basically like a little biscuit cookie type thing, just flour and sugar, dried fruit and that sort of thing. And it would usually have a cross on it, and the cross would be a sign of alms for the poor and also a sign of Christ. So this is something that was done for many years, and I actually just made soul cakes and I wanted to be even more historically accurate, so I actually found a recipe from 1604, and it's a real Tudor recipe from a cookbook, Eleanor Fetty Place's cookbook, and I did make them. I will say they were nice overall, a little bit dry, but I let it off because it is such an old recipe. But it was really fun and interesting to just connect with history in a different way like this. So the next tradition is something that I remember from my childhood. I don't know if people still do this, but it is apple bobbing. You might call this apple duking or apple ducking in Scotland or Northern England. And there are a few different ways to go about it. So one is simply to have a basin of water and you put apples into it and you have to basically dunk your head in and grab the apple with your teeth. And there are other ways of this as well. And I remember this one from my childhood, which is putting an apple on a string and hanging it from the ceiling and having to eat the apple like that. And apparently there's one in Scotland as well where you would cover a scone in treacle and you'd eat it tied to a string as well. No one's 100% sure where this came from. This might be from Roman tradition, it might be a Samhain thing, or potentially a little bit of both, but I think it's still pretty much alive and well. It's also connected to love divination as per usual, and sometimes it was said that the first person who was able to take a bite out of the apple on the string would be the next person to marry. And it was also said that if a maiden slept with the apple she bobbed under a pillow, she would dream of her loved one. And the final tradition I've got for you today is called Mischief Night. And I think all of these things connected, like the guising, the souling, mischief night, all kind of contribute to the modern idea of trick-or-treating. And we've got first mention of this in the late 1700s. And it was a little bit of regulated mayhem, I guess. We've got similar things around the winter time. I feel like these cold, dark months, they just have so much fascinating and crazy folklore compared to the rest of the year a lot of the time. So this was something that was done around this time as well, and basically it would just be a night of mischief, hijinks, jokes, sometimes downright vandalism, and this was done all over. Sometimes the dates varied, so it could be around what bonfire night is. Some people say that it used to be done in May, but it was brought to this time of the year, and it has different names all over. It could be called Mischief Night, Devil Night, Mickey Night, Cabbage Night, Goosey Night, all sorts of things, and it's spread over to the US as well. I don't know if this is a thing now, but again, from my childhood, I remember that this was a thing. We didn't call it Mischief Night, but it was just known that the day before Halloween or on Halloween, you had to be a bit careful because youngsters would be getting up to no good, basically. And I remember getting eggs thrown at our windows. We weren't singled out. Everyone got eggs thrown at their windows. People would, try to wrap houses in toilet paper, though I think that's more of an American thing. But I remember there was all sorts of mischief and troublemaking going on. And apparently this has caused quite a few problems in different places with just downright vandalism. So quite an interesting one. Maybe not something I would recommend to that level. If you want to play a little practical joke on somebody you know well, then fair enough. But maybe leave the vandalism and egg throwing for never. So that was quite an interesting one, which I see a lot of trick-or-treating in with. So there we go. Those are some lesser known traditions around the time of Halloween and Samhain. Not all of them would be exactly on Halloween. Some of them might be a little bit before, a little bit after. But this time of the year in general, it's a time of darkness and mischief and otherworldliness and peering into the future, glimpsing things that may come to pass, finding out who your loved one is, venerating ancestors. There are all sorts of different things going on, but it's just a fascinating time of year, and I wanted to share a couple of these things with you that I don't see many people talk about and you might not have heard of before. So I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you've got any from where you live as well, obviously this is just me talking about the UK and Ireland with a bit of a spread over to the US, but the whole world is rich in amazing cultures and folk traditions and all sorts. So this is just what I've got to share with you today. Please leave me a comment if there's anything that you remember from your childhood or that I've missed out, or anything from your culture, because I would love to learn about it. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful Halloween, a wonderful Samhain. I will see you in the next video.